I'm going to go ahead and welcome everyone to today's webinar put on by our company here at HeadsUp. Today is all about how to use the new science of sleep in your health practice. And I'm honored to be joined by some great guests here today. So we'll do quick introductions. So starting Tara with yourself, if you will.
Yeah, so I am the CEO and co-founder of Sleep Me. We make chili sleep products. If you've heard of that, my background is in physics, fell into sleep through that product innovation and my own sleep journey to figure out how to make sleep work. And as of today, we coach numerous professional teams, including some national championships. So it's kind of fun to be able to take some professional athletes that didn't really care about sleep before. And when they did care about sleep, it made huge differences for them. So I'm here to talk about sleep from temperature regulation, but also some general sleep tips that'll help leverage sleep for your patients.
Amazing. Thank you, Tara. And Dr. Kelly.
Yeah, I'm Greg Kelly. I'm a naturopathic doctor and I'm director of product development for NeuroHacker Collective. We make a range of dietary supplements and are most famous for the nootropic space, so things to support the brain, which I'll be talking to you about what we would think of it as a nighttime nootropic, so something to support the brain as you go into the evening hours and sleep.
Beautiful. I've actually already had the honor of interviewing both Tara and Greg for separate occasions, and I can speak to their expertise here. So we're excited to have you both as our special guests. And then, of course, our Chief Medical Officer, Dr. John, if you want to introduce yourself.
Thanks, DJ. Yep. As you mentioned, I'm the CMO of HeadsUp Health. I'm an internal medicine doctor who specializes in preventative health and wellness. And I think sleep is probably the most important aspect of doing that. So I'm excited to hear the presentations and discuss a little bit more about how to optimize sleep.
Beautiful. And then our next person, Dave, if you're available, a quick intro, our fearless leader.
Yeah, thanks, TJ. Hi, everyone. My name is Dave Korsunski, and I am the founder CEO here at HeadsUp. And just want to welcome everyone here. I'll be talking for a couple of minutes once we kick off about how we internally here at HeadsUp use a lot of this data within our own team to optimize our own personal performance. And then, of course, everything else that we do here to empower both individuals and practitioners, really just to use data to improve health outcomes. So I'm grateful to be here, and we'll hear more from me in a couple of minutes. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Dave. And for those of you that don't know, my name's TJ. I lead our new accounts team and head of engagement for HeadsUp, working with lots of great practices all over the world on rolling out our platform to help better outcomes from a data-driven perspective for all your clients and patients. So that's introductions on us. We would love to also hear from you. We'd love it if you're here, if you're tuning in, if you could introduce yourself real quick in the chat box down below. We'd love to know who you are, where you live, the type of work you do, and we'd love to welcome you into today's webinar. So go ahead and just briefly do that here in the initial 5 to 10 minutes as we get started here. And our next step, just to give you context, if you're wondering, who is HeadsUp, if we're new to you, we want to welcome you. We are Precision Health Analytics. So we help leading clinical and coaching practices stay on the cutting edge with technology to deliver data-driven, personalized health at scale. That's our focus. That's our mission. That's our mantra here at HeadsUp. So basically, our specialty is helping practices like yours who work with patients and clients white label our customizable remote monitoring platform, both web and mobile app available. And if you're not familiar with what we can offer within that, we actually have integrations with the world's top wearables, apps, and devices, lab testing integrations, analytics, both on the individual and group side, which Dave will be talking about here soon that we're pretty excited about, and a lot more. So if any of this is of interest for you all that are tuning in, you can create a a free account with us, you can schedule a free strategy call. So there'll be a link in the chat box that myself or one of my colleagues will put in a link to create a health professional account with HeadsUp to start giving it a spin. And we'd love to offer a chance to connect further to learn a little bit more about the work you're doing and see how we might be able to support you. So thank you again for joining. And now I will pass the ball to our CEO and founder, Dave, to give us a little bit of behind the scenes at HeadsUp, what we've been doing the last few months to hold each other accountable for better sleep and health outcomes.
Yeah, thank you, TJ. I remember when I worked at VMware in Palo Alto in Silicon Valley, and the CEO of that company, his name was Paul Moritz. He had previously, excuse me, worked at Microsoft, and he worked right alongside Bill Gates and the other top leadership there. And he said that he was personally responsible for coining the phrase, eat your own dog food. And so what that means is you test every single thing that you recommend to your customers personally. And I honestly believe that that's a huge part of our success here at HeadsUp. Everyone on the team, we test everything ourselves rigorously, and we love it. So one of the challenges that we rolled out is in Q1 of this year, we really wanted to start testing out this concept of how can we as a team come together and support ourselves with better sleep, and how can we use the use the data not just to identify where there are sleep issues. I think it's very common when you're working in the data field to associate the data as being able to identify when there's a problem. But I also want to emphasize that on the flip side of that, data also creates opportunities to foster engagement and positive behavior change and reinforcement and coaching. So what we've done at HeadsUp is we ran a 3-month challenge, and we used the Oura Ring in this particular case, but you could use any wearable connected to our platform. And hopefully soon we'll be pulling in some of the biometric data from Tara and team. So this would also be possible. But I'll share my screen here, and this is a prototype of our internal challenge. It's a prototype that will be generally available to all of our customers on the platform here momentarily. I'd say maybe within about 1 to 2 weeks. But what we did internally, this is an internal report. But imagine that this is a report on all of the clients in your practice. So Tara, you gave the example of the sports teams, for example. How can we really start to look at the performance of the cohort as a whole? And so how has that team's sleep and recovery this month compared to prior months? And can we start to look at improving the cohort of the team? So this is all of our internal staff members here at HeadsUp. We track our scores month on month as an average. We also look at how the team is doing as a whole each month. And not surprisingly, when I put some cash on the table and created some prize money, everybody started sleeping like a rock. So the months where we ran our internal challenge, just creating that fun, engaging community feel where everyone could come in the morning, check their stats. We also had this connected to our Slack channel. So anytime anybody scored an 85 or higher on the ring, a message went into our Slack channel, and we all supported each other. And we also tried to not take the data too seriously. So as many people know, we're coming off the end of COVID, and a lot of people right in the challenge had really poor numbers. And we also used that as an opportunity to encourage people just to take care of themselves and to take some extra rest. So this is our internal sleep challenge dashboard. And then we can drill down into individual user stats. You can see TJ is right at the top here. And he's got pretty much every biohack you have a name for at his place. So does Steve here, number 1. These guys are doing ice bath and infrared light and all of the things to optimize sleep. And it shows up in the data without question. And then here's a look at the breakdown of month on month. And this, first of all, gives you some ways to validate that everything you're doing with a cohort of individuals is working. It also helps you quickly identify who's doing well and who might need a little bit of extra help. And then you have experts like Dr. Lemansky and others who can dive in and start to look for things like potentially sleep apnea or look at things like temperature regulation in the room that Tara's going to talk about, especially if you're sleeping with someone next to you and you have completely different preferences on temperature. It can have a massive effect on sleep quality. So this just gives us some really good data at the cohort level. It creates a lot of fun engagement in our team. And I'll just drop a little teaser. The next thing we're adding to this challenge is every time you get 90 or above on the Oura Ring, we're going to automatically pay out $5 for the team.
I thought it was
You get a
10, Dave.
95.
I thought it was
10
10
for 95.
Yeah,
Oh.
actually, I want in. I think I can win at this one.
So you get $5 for a 90 or higher. You have to get $10 for a 95 or higher, Tara. And then our BI developers are building a widget here where you'll be able to track your payouts in real time.
Oh, wow.
So the staff can come in here and just see that they've cashed in $50 this month for great sleep. It's just super fun ways to use data. And this is an example of our internal report. So much more to come on that, TJ, but just using data for engagement and fun. And also, we had a great outcome when we ran it. So over to you.
Exactly. It was fun. And thanks for covering that, Dave. It sounds like there's interest from people outside of our team to get involved. So Tara's talking a big game. I'm sure she's got all she's got all the hacks to stand up our scores a bit. Awesome. Yes. So that gives you an idea of what's coming. As Dave mentioned, these group reporting features are going to be added to the user interface of our system for the team, of course, to access, not your end users, in the next few weeks. So you'll be able to set up your own challenges like this and do incentives similar to what we're doing. So and so on that note, I'm going to share another few examples before we dive into our first feature presentation that I think a few of you might find interesting. So before Heads Up, I didn't have any data-driven ways besides just logging into, my Oura Ring or this wearable or that to look at my data. And now with Heads Up, I can bring it all into the same place and really do correlations and run experiments. So I'm a big health hacker, and some of course, experiments to run around sleep can be very vast. And so this is one simple one. Dave probably remembers this. This was at the Metabolic Health Summit about 2 years ago, right before the pandemic. And one night on February 1st, I had a couple drinks of alcohol, and you can see my AM readiness and HRV went down as lowest as it was that week after a night of some alcohol at this conference. And then the next night I had 0 alcohol, and then boom, everything went right back up. So this simple 2-metric, 3-metric feedback loop helped incentivize me to realize how big of an impact alcohol can have on sleep, for instance. That's just one behavior, right? So that's one example that I've run in my own lifestyle. Now, let's get into some real world examples of real devices that I've been experimenting with, starting with Tara's company. The Ooler is the name of one of their sleep cooling systems made by Chili Sleep. Sleep Me is one of their new brands that makes a brand new device that she'll be talking more about today. But this particular experiment I ran looked at 4 weeks of using the Ooler compared to the prior 4 weeks when I didn't have it. We were moving homes during these dates, and I didn't. My Ooler was in storage, so I was without it for a couple months. So it was a good chance to run an experiment. And look what happened here. Looking at 4 sleep metrics from the Oura Ring, the result was I was not only more effective overall, but more efficient. So my time of sleep went down from 8.1 hours on average to 7.5. Which a lot of people say 7.5 can be a magic number because we can sleep in 90-minute, or our sleep cycles can be in 90-minute increments. But anyway, so that some people think, all right, less sleep, oh, that's bad. Well, in this case, everything else improved. My HRV went up by 18%. My deep sleep went up by nearly 6%, and resting heart rate went down 1.5%, which is a better sign of recovery. So this is an experiment I ran showing you some data, looking at using the Oura Ring, a wearable worn on the finger, which we integrate with in our system, relative to the dates of which I started using the Ooler sleep system. The next example is with our other partner here, using Qualia Night sleep supplement, 4 weeks on versus the prior 4 weeks off. Again, the results are pretty strong. Overall, my AM readiness score went up 3.7%, sleep score up 4%, REM sleep up 21%, deep sleep up 31%. Now, there, of course, could have been a few different variables involved with both of these experiments that might have, this isn't a full, this is N equals 1, my friends, but N equals 1 is better than nothing and can be really helpful for an individual to start to target and understand what's working and what's not, and to build motivation to continue tinkering that lifestyle. So I was pretty impressed by both of these little experiments. And so I use both of these tools often. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to involve them in this webinar. And so that just gives you a little bit of a taste of what's possible for running N equals 1 experiments using HeadsUp to track new interventions like Qualia Night sleep supplement, which we'll talk more about here in a second, and then sleep cooling systems with our other partner, Tara's company. So that's a quick little tease, little taste. So I'm pretty proud of those numbers, but now we're going to understand why those numbers maybe were as good as they were, right? And we're going to start with our first feature presentation, Dr. Greg Kelly from NeuroHacker Collective. So we're going to go ahead and dive in. Dr. Kelly, and you can take it from here and tell us all about how we can sleep better as a group.
Sounds great. So I've got a long history of sleep. I was an officer in the Navy in the 80s. So I've lived the sleep deprived side of life at one point and came out of that as a naturopathic student, also sleep deprived at different points. And I think by the time I graduated in 96, I was well aware of how important sleep was, and it, in many ways, much more aware than most of my colleagues at that time. So with that, let's understand a little bit about how sleep works. So can you go to the next slide, TJ? Yeah, we don't need to do my bio. So quick about NeuroHacker Collective. We were founded by 3 people, 2 brothers, Daniel Smachtenberger and James Smachtenberger, one of their good friends, Jordan Greenhall. But big picture, NeuroHacker Collective was founded to really help people optimize performance in different areas, with the idea being, if we can do that, we'll be better versions of ourselves. And if individually we're better versions of ourselves, the world will be a better place. So we started with the brain. Qualia Mind was our original product, and Qualia Night, which I'll speak about soon, was our 3rd product. And so the idea of the name Qualia has to do, it's a philosophical term, but basically it's the experience of what it's like to be you. And the way I tend to think about it, the reason we use Qualia is because we want to support what's most important to you as the user of our products. Next slide. So one of the things I think that's really important to understand, and it's the reason that we start with this, is that what often happens is just before bedtime, so the half hour before, people then decide, okay, now I'm going to do something for my sleep. But really, it's what we do at the beginning parts of the evening. So think of transitions like sunrise and sunset that have the biggest impacts on our performance across the whole 24-hour day. And that's because these transitions are when circadian rhythms tend to be most impacted. So big picture is what we're doing around dinner time will affect both our sleep, but how we perform across the next day as well. Next slide. So I'm going to get a little bit into the details of sleep, but before I do, and it's not on this slide, but just the most commonly used model of understanding sleep would be essentially a 2-process model. So the idea is we have something called the homeostatic sleep drive. So fundamentally, from the moment we wake up, the drive to sleep starts to accumulate. So think of it almost like we start to go deeper and deeper into the red the longer we've been awake. And if you think of like a newborn infant, fairly soon after they start to accrue that sleep drive, they fall asleep and have a nap. Okay, so what then it allows an infant to essentially extend the duration that they're awake without having to repay this homeostatic sleep drive is the body clock, and it's called clock-dependent alerting. So a big part of the neuroscience of sleep is that interaction between the homeostatic sleep drive and circadian or clock-dependent alerting. So some of the molecules that play the most important part are things that you'd be familiar with. Just think of can you go back a slide just for a second? In the early evening is when things like cortisol, which is very much a morning hormone, descends. But then we start to have other things that begin to become more dominant. So adenosine, GABA, we're all familiar with melatonin. So we'll go to the next slide. So this slide asks, which part of the brain regulates sleep? The answer is the hypothalamus, hence it's bolded. But the key thing about the hypothalamus is it regulates a bunch of drives. And in the big picture, these are things that are really important for our survival. So sleep drive, sex drive, appetite, thirst, temperature regulation, and actually the body clock is located in the hypothalamus as well. So key point, think of sleep as being something that's self-regulated. So we can go to the next slide. And before we go into the consequences of poor sleep, I wanted to give an idea of what I mean by self-regulated. So self-regulated in a big picture sense means that we have almost permissive control over something. And by that, I mean that most of us feel like, oh, well, I can decide how much I eat or how much sleep I need. And as long as we're doing a good job meeting that self-regulated drives needs, like we're getting enough sleep or we're eating the amount of food that our brain says we need, then things are hunky-dory. But if we fail to, then that control is essentially taken from us. And with sleep, one of the things that then happens would be called microsleep. We doze off and on super quickly all through the day. So what are then the consequences of poor sleep? And really, these are just some of the high points. There's a lot more. But brain performance is going to suffer. If we're into exercise, both our ability to put in a good workout and recover from it is going to be diminished. I think at this point, most people are aware how much of an impact sleep has on weakening the immune system if we don't get enough. Maybe much newer, and I'm not sure how many people would know, but during sleep, there's something called the lymphatic system in the brain. But think of it as it's basically a cleansing process that happens in the brain, rinsing away any of the waste products and things that are built up during the day. Sleep's essentially critical for anything to do with rejuvenation and repair processes. Sleep's now well associated with body weight, but even more specifically, it's visceral body fat, like the unhealthy belly fat that is the most impacted by a loss of sleep. And then really fundamentally, if we want to look our best, feel our best, and do our best, we need to get good quality sleep. So next slide. So I mentioned that homeostatic sleep drive, and the key molecule thought to be what accumulates over the course of the day while we're awake to essentially be used to keep track of that sleep deprivation that's building up is adenosine, and it's the A and ATP. So it's think of it as one of the different neuromodulatory system that's strongly impacting our ability to sleep. And when you think of caffeine's effect, so caffeine antagonizes this. It's believed to be the main reason that caffeine's alerting. So next slide. Another one of the really important neuromodulatory systems is the melatonin system. So tryptophan ultimately being made into melatonin. And melatonin is probably the most used supplement for sleep, but it's often misused. And so the big picture is how I would think about melatonin is it's classically categorized as a chronobiotic, but it's something that impacts our body clock rhythms. So the most important role is almost the opposite of what cortisol does. Cortisol anchors our morning rhythms, melatonin anchors our darkness rhythms. And so what would normally happen is we're going to have a big surge of this towards that beginning or a few hours after darkness starts. And that synchronizes our body clock and all the other jobs that have to happen during sleep. So, key thing, I think, I know when I've used melatonin, I tend to dose it much more physiologically than pharmacologically, but it's often used the opposite way in much of the supplement industry. And so a key thing just to think in terms of, we have this homeostatic sleep drive building and building. So the amount of adenosine outside of our neurons in the brain is growing and growing and growing. And then what then signals finally the body clock to say, okay, we can now get to sleep is that surge in melatonin. So that's essentially the signal that says, okay, we can turn clock depending alerting off. And then a few other things play big roles at sleep. So one's GABA, that's our chief, basically inhibitory neurotransmitter. So the main role it plays is anything to do with calmness and relaxation, obviously big leading into sleep. And then the last, what I would say, next slide, important piece of the puzzle, I guess we don't have a slide for it, would be what I would call hyperarousal. So that's our stress system, but not really the cortisol part of the stress system. It's the adrenaline, noradrenaline, and basically these brain neurotransmitters that lead to us being almost over alert at the wrong time of the day. So here in the slide, we have a picture of a book I published, I think it was 2011. It's on basically getting in shape. So building muscle, losing body fat, hence the name Shapeshift. And one of the chapters actually was on sleep. So, for those interested, I go into a much deeper dive of the relationship sleep has with staying in shape. But I've experienced what's this quote quite frequently with patients and other people I've worked with. And the quote is, the opportunity for sleep seems to come like a bus, arriving at certain times and leaving at certain times. If we get on, we'll fall asleep. If we miss this bus, we might need to wait for the next one to arrive. And how that would show up in your practice or with people you're working with is, as an example, on my Oura Ring, rarely would it be more than 3 to 5 minutes after I lay down in bed until I fall asleep. I basically am alert for this wave of sleepiness coming, and then I jump on the bus. But what often happens with people that you would work with is they're still streaming something on TV, reading a book, or doing something else. That wave of sleepiness comes, they don't go to sleep, and now they have to wait for that next wave to come. And it comes like a bus on a schedule. So it may not come, for another hour. And then they decide to go to sleep in between and end up lying in bed wide awake for 35 or 40 minutes. So that's, to me, the key thing we want to do is become more attuned to the arrival of the sleep bus. Next slide.
I love that metaphor. I just thought I'd comment. It really could be as long as another hour, just
Could
like a
even be
bus.
more, yeah.
So yeah, it could be longer. Yep.
So when you think of then of this product, Qualia Night, we basically created Qualia Night to touch on all those things I mentioned: the adenosine system, the melatonin system, the GABA system, hyperarousal, and ultimately to help people to help that sleep bus signal be stronger. So we can go to the next slide. So we included a variety of ingredients. I'm not going to touch on them all now, but we'll highlight a few. So one's holy basil. It's an Ayurvedic herb that's Tulsi would be the name it's usually referred to. And it's categorized as a rasayana. And rasayana, the best way to translate that would be as a rejuvenator. Sometimes it's thought of as an adaptogen, but a rejuvenator would be more accurate. And it's a very good herb for things to do with calming the mood, helping with stress response, supporting lower cortisol levels, but also it's a cognitive herb. So like a nootropic, but really not a morning nootropic for most people, since it's doing these more calming things, but a great then first thing in the evening nootropic. So we can move to the next slide. This is just a quick study, but there's other studies on, again, holy basil. So this is on a branded one called Osibest. And so we included this for these different reasons, right? Like a big part of Qualia Night was to support a calmer mood leading up into the hours before sleep. Counter that hyperarousal, that almost too aggressive stress response. And ultimately our goal of a nighttime nootropic is that by doing this over time, your brain will perform better during the day. So holy basil was a fit in all of these areas. So we can go to the next slide. So one of the things that you'd see routinely paired with holy basil in Ayurvedic medicine is ashwagandha. And KSM 66 is a branded clinically studied ashwagandha. It's the most studied to date. And it's, again, ashwagandha is one of these rasayanas from Ayurvedic medicine. It's something that's a rejuvenator herb. So we can go to the next slide. Again, it's been studied for sleep, works well. Just quick point with ashwagandha, if using it for stress reduction and sleep, it tends to work better over 4 weeks than 2 weeks, better over 8 weeks than 4 weeks. So just give it time with your patients and clients. Next slide. So again, it was a fit for multiple reasons. And then a third Ayurvedic herb is Gotu Kola. So again, this is thought of traditionally as a rasayana, but specifically a medya rasayana, which is a mental rejuvenation. So it was a brain tonic. And again, it supports aspects of the GABA system, works with calming the mood, helps brain health, helps with stress. So again, a really good end of the day nootropic substance. So we can move forward. And then we can move forward again. And then the last ingredient I'll highlight is just reishi mushroom. So again, reishi mushroom traditionally would have been thought of in Chinese traditional medicine as a Shen tonic. And what that means is something that calms the heart. So again, that idea of calming and centering. So it's been studied in some Chinese literature for sleep, but good for the immune system, good for cognitive function, and works on different neurotransmitters, including the GABA system. So with that brings us to Qualia Night. So when we created Qualia Night, going back to that opening quote, there's lots of products you can take just before bedtime that have melatonin or sedative herbs or both. And the idea is they're basically trying to almost, what I think of, put someone to sleep quickly. And the truth is, I wasn't particularly thrilled about that approach to sleep. I think a more reasonable thing is to start the night and build into this calming, relaxing, anti-stress physiology, support the production of melatonin so that when it's time to sleep several hours later, we're naturally moving into sleep gradually, rather than the way I tend to think of some of these more sedative things is trying to slam on the brakes at the last second. So with that, it would work on many of those different areas. This shows some of the ingredients. Like I said, I just touched on some, but we've got ingredients to support the building of melatonin, the adenosine system, particularly the responsiveness of receptors in that system, the same with the GABA system, and again, quite a bit built in that supports like countering that tendency to hyperarousal. And our general recommendation for a dose is 4 capsules a day, but it's not set in stone. What we've seen is some people do better with just microdosing it and taking one capsule, others with 2. And it's always fine to do less and build up more to get to a good dose. And the other thing just to keep in mind is we recommend that people take it for 5 days on, 2 days off. We're big fans of cycling things that interact substantially with receptors and neurotransmitters in the brain in the same way that you'd cycle in and out of an exercise program rather than doing the same thing every day. And what we did see when we studied this before we ever took it to market is, again, almost what you'd expect from what I mentioned with ashwagandha. People did better after 2 weeks of taking it than 1 week, and better after 4 weeks than 2 weeks. So with that, I think it brings us to the offer for today. So using the HeadsUp Health code to buy Qualia Night, you'll not only get the Qualia Night, but you'll get a free bottle of another one of our products, and frankly, one of my favorite products called Qualia Immune. And Qualia Immune, when we actually did our study on that, one of the interesting things we found was people that took Qualia Immune in the morning, about half of them reported much better sleep. So, so something that I personally believe is very synergistic with the Qualia Night product.
Amazing.
So with that, I'll turn it back over to TJ and
Awesome.
answer any questions.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Kelly. I haven't tried the Qualia Immune. Excited to try that. And it sounds like, yeah, there's a great offer here. As you can see, buy a bottle of Qualia Night, you get a free bottle of Qualia Immune. So that discount code is just HeadsUp Health, straightforward. So thank you for the kind offer and the detailed approach, right, around the systems that affect the neuroscience of sleep. And what I really appreciate is how you talk about those necessary processes such as GABA and melatonin, yet you don't include actual GABA and you don't include actual melatonin. You include the things that help to naturally create and build those things up, which I appreciate. And have enjoyed, as is previously shared, my sleep numbers have enjoyed the benefits of this as well. So yeah, we can have
one more second.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. So the other thing I forgot to mention is We believe, like, I take this at dinner time, but like our goal of this is you take it 3 to 4 hours before bed. So this is the beginning of the evening.
I was going to
Product.
ask, yeah, like what specific, is it like right as sun is setting, or is there a specific time, like amount of time before bed that is perfectly optimal? That was one of my first questions.
We saw a little bit of variance, but some people did better if it was closer to 2 hours before bed. Some people, that 3 to 4 hour window. So what I would just say is somewhere in the transition time is when I would personally take it and recommend it to people, but it's not set in stone. So whatever works with their schedule. We do see more likely disruptions of sleep occur with a small percentage of people when it's taken too close to bedtime. So I know there's been some people that like taking it right before bedtime, but we have much more data on taking it earlier in the evening.
Interesting.
And then what we've also seen with Oura Ring or some of the other tracking is that what improves for people can vary. So some people, it was their REM sleep. For others, it was deep sleep. Deep sleep was fairly common. For me personally, one of the things that I consistently notice when I cycle on and off it is my heart rate across the evening is always a few beats per minute lower when I'm on Qualia Night.
Interesting. Nice. That's great. Well, so if you haven't already, please share any questions that you would like answered by Dr. Kelly here over the next few minutes. There's a Q&A box, or you can just use the chat box. There was one question. Some people says, big fan of quality of sleep, immune and skin too. Great analogy. How important is hypocretin/orexin?
So there's lots of other things that play roles in the sleep system, but I would put that as more important, at least in my understanding, in the appetite system. So a different drive.
Okay.
But all of these things interact, and the truth is we're just figuring out a lot of things. So,
right.
And almost everything does more than one thing. So we don't mention it in this study, but the gut microbiome. So there's a gut sleep axis that's just starting to be talked about on PubMed and in science. And quite a few of the ingredients in Qualia Night actually support the gut microbiome. So, we're complicated, complex systems, and often by doing one thing, we can talk about the main thing it's doing, like an ashwagandha with stress, but it's doing so much more.
Right. Next question is, so basically the cortisol and melatonin are yin and yang of each other. Is that a good analogy?
I would think of that, like if you were doing very much, like if you were doing, cortisol would surge at sunrise. That 7 to 9 period is when it has that really big surge. And then it should be, its lowest level around sleep. And melatonin would be the opposite. It should be at a very low level when cortisol is high, and a really high level when cortisol is low.
Last question here. Any data on insomnia?
So it gets dicey for us to talk about insomnia, but what we really focused on was a couple different things when we were developing Qualia Night. And one of the things NeuroHacker Collective does that I believe is fairly unique in the supplement industry is we test products out on ourselves first. If things look good, we'll do basically a pilot study, and it has to then succeed before we would bring a product to market.
Right.
And with Qualia Night, the key thing I was most concerned about, honestly, was something called restorative sleep. So there's a restorative sleep questionnaire, but basically, how is someone performing when they wake up in the morning? Because that's almost a better clue to the quality of their sleep than these other things, right? Because we can think we know, like, oh, more deep sleep is better, but often the more we learn, the more complicated things appear. So how things show up in the real world is more important to me. But what we did see is that restorative sleep, it was like 9 out of 10 people scored better on this questionnaire. For questionnaires that were more directly related to things that would have to do with falling asleep, staying asleep, it was about 8 out of 10. And one of the things that I believe is a biohacker concept, your mileage may vary. Because something works well for me doesn't necessarily it would work well for everyone else, right? That's just not the case. Yep. And so it's one of the reasons we offer a money back guarantee on our products, including Qualia Night, because we want to make sure that if it didn't work for you, that you'll be reimbursed for it.
That's great. Amazing. Thank you, Dr. Kelly. Appreciate the beautiful sleep insights here today, and excited for people to try out Qualia Night personally and their practice with clients and patients. And some people did ask, yes, the slides will be they're recorded. We'll send all this out afterwards. So we'll transition on now to our second feature presentation, which if you don't have slides, that's fine, Tara. We'd love to just talk with you and learn a little bit more about your amazing company and products and how you all are helping people sleep better. So Tara Youngblood with Sleep Me, I will give you the floor and to have people on the webinar today learn a little bit more about the role of temperature regulation and how that affects quality sleep. You might
I'm
be
on mute.
muted.
I'm sorry.
No worries.
I didn't want to create background noise. Apologize for that. No, I could put all up a slide. I did a presentation at a US Army base to sort of similar audience yesterday, just the military version. So I could pull that up if we have questions. But our approach to sleep is somewhat similar. All the mechanics were wonderfully served up, and I appreciate that from that perspective. We take a little different approach because temperature and environmental cues and how their role in that sleep mechanism. Clifford Sapir out of Harvard, starting in 2003, sort of benchmarked what triggers and turns on sleep. There's a bunch of articles on the sleep switch. So if you want to Google sleep switch, you will be linked to his research. And it turns out the sleep switch does involve a change in temperature. And that's really because environment, sleep is really old. It's in the old part of your brain, which is that hypothalamus that's already been mentioned. All organisms kind of have this on and off, at least mammals in particular. And so when that happens, it's environmental triggers. If you think about it from your dog to your cat to humans, are all triggered by we need to go to sleep by different environmental triggers, temperature being one of them. But as was mentioned, light, sound, even scent all play a role in helping us get to sleep. Sound was one of the first senses you developed in the womb that you could hear and listen outside. So all of those environmental characteristics are really important when you think about sleep. And the circadian rhythm is another big element of when you go to sleep. But one of the things we've specialized in and part of coaching for military or professional athletes is they don't always get the luxury of that analogy of waiting for the bus. Someone else had asked about sort of PTSD, depression, traumatic brain injuries. We work with people like that. In all honesty, my journey with sleep was horrible with insomnia, had some personal trauma and really caused depression and all sorts of other elements that really prevented me from sleeping. So my research really did dive into how to solve for insomnia and how to fix it no matter what. So when we talk about it with our athletes, whether they're on the road or with jet lag or wherever they go, and that goes beyond just that temperature regulation, but how do you find sleep no matter where you are? If you're a healthcare worker, a lot of military activities happen at night because that's how it's served best. So they're not sleeping at night when it's often most convenient to sleep. So we really focus on how to make sure that you can fall asleep and what are the environmental cues or factors that are going to influence that sleep. And so when we talk about temperature regulation, and I'll talk a little bit about the product, it basically is a thermostat for your bed. Just like your car has a radiator, the engine in your car needs to maintain cooling in order to most efficiently work at night in your bed when you're in your mattress and it's absorbing heat and then reflecting it back to you and you're covered up with covers. Whatever's happening in the ambient temperature isn't always creating that ideal scenario for sleep. When we sort of ingrained our circadian rhythm, and you could see that in that core body temperature drop after you fall asleep, we ingrained to be outside. We ingrained to have a temperature drop at night, and our bodies are used to that. So in our wonderful climate controlled environments, all year round is exactly the same. And there's no change of temperature that's going to flip your sleep switch. And so we are able to augment that and do that for you in your bed. And what that means is no matter when you go to sleep or how you go to sleep, we're able to manage that temperature. And I will say that although the Uller that you're on may not have enough cooling capacity, the dock does have enough cooling capacity to mitigate even that alcohol that you're seeing in your data, which is really awesome because we all like to do fun things and to live our lives. And although sleep is something that we want to be respectful of, and that's also something we teach our athletes in military, we can't always do that. And who always wants to not go out and have fun? So we talk about quality of sleep and how you can drive towards that. And so if you're using temperature or our products to manage your sleep, we talk about like what temperature does it feel good to fall asleep in, that sort of bedtime temperature. And for everyone, that's going to vary. That can vary from someone who needs to be super warm. So MS patients, a lot of people with depression or anxiety will feel cold if they have a physical manifestation of it. They may use a weighted blanket to help out with that. But they're going to have a hard time falling asleep. So warming up often sort of triggers that nesting. It feels good to fall asleep. But there's the other extreme. Terry Walls with MS also has used 20 minutes of ice bath to fall asleep to get great deep sleep. So somewhere between warming up and an ice bath, most people will fall into what feels good to sleep. And it usually entrains to what you did as a child. So if you start with asking people, well, what feels good to fall asleep? They'll usually know that temperature. But then once you fall asleep, your core body temperature is trying to drop 2 degrees temperature. So you really want to do everything you can to facilitate that. Although you move through all different kinds of sleep, deep sleep, light sleep, REM sleep in 90-minute cycles, your opportunity for deep sleep is most often in the first half of the night. As you get older, that gets messier and messier, but it's pretty clean as you're younger. And then as you age, deep sleep in particular gets really hard to get. So it may spread itself out throughout the night or not happen at all for some people. Temperature is a way to kind of tell your body unconsciously when you're sleeping to say, by the way, you need to be getting deep sleep now. And that colder temperature is one of the ways in which the language of temperature speaks to your unconscious brain and is able to trigger sleep, in particular deep sleep. And then when your body's trying to warm up, just like the planet is starting to warm up as the sun comes around, you need to warm up as well. And when you warm up to wake up, I think you mentioned it, TJ, of you'll get more REM sleep. That's more the second half of the night. But it also then releases that trigger of cortisol. So just like we talked about previously about that release of cortisol in the morning, temperature is one way to release that or trigger that release, turning off sleep. When you're really warm to wake up, you'll actually turn off sleep. And again, start that mechanism, start the buildup of ATP, start that mechanism, and you can emphasize that. So the people that are working around shift work or other times, you can basically force that sleep mechanism and get past that in order to trigger turning on and off sleep. And that can be really powerful for, again, people outside, if you are depressed, PTSD, all those things that stop us from having a nice, relaxing evening and allowing us to go to sleep. Temperature is one way to kind of combat that. And even if you're someone that sleeps really well, you may still benefit from at least thermal neutral to cooler at the right time and warm at the right time, especially as you age. All the things that were easy as 20 are generally not as easy at 50 or 60. Unfortunately, it's just fact.
Oh, that ain't that the truth. But that's why we have all these great technologies to help us continue to stay sharp in our approach. So beautiful background. Thank you for sharing context around a little bit of the science and the approach you all take. And it, yeah, I'm, like I said, I'm excited to try the new device. I have one of the older ones, the Uller. But to your point, you know, I find it fascinating that temperature regulation should be different all throughout the night to optimize certain stages of sleep. Like you said, generally better to have it colder for deep sleep at the beginning, the first half, and generally better to have it warmer towards the end for REM and increasing the cortisol. That was a great point I hadn't considered. And overall, though, it sounds like I can totally agree with you in terms of people's evening routines and like pre-bed rituals and for temperature and like what helps one won't help everyone. For instance, a little bit of a cold shower. Like I like to get my body as cold as possible going to bed. And my wife likes the hot bath right before bed, which I'll do every now and then, but I'll go from the hot bath to a quick cold shower and then maybe step outside in the snow to cool down even more. So yeah, everyone's approach is different. And as Greg mentioned earlier, mileage may vary. So it really sounds like just comes down to experimenting and getting to know what sort of rituals would work best for you pre-bed, and then be able to actually have a technology to schedule the temperature to change throughout the night. Because it's, even if you were to do that with your ambient room temperature, with the thermostat in your room, it's not going to affect your actual bed. And especially if you're like, sleeping with a partner and that generates body heat. My wife and I sleep separately now, and that's actually helped us for the most part. And we, but it's cool though, if you do sleep together, you can have, right. Tell us about like, you can customize on each side of the bed for each partner. Is that right?
Yeah, so we, are unique in the market in the sense that, if you want to have one side of the bed versus the other, or just half of the bed, and adjustable beds, it works with that. The future one that is coming out, the sort of future state with the Dock Pro, is we will have a sleep tracker coming online that's in bed. Again, the sleep trackers today, even your Aura Ring, is actually only about 40 to 60%, depending on the person, accurate, certainly for deep sleep. So we're really highly focused on the sleep state. They're very accurate in HRV, resting heart rate. Those are very great metrics to get, but that sleep state. So, and we do real time, which means that while you're sleeping, when attached with the Dock Pro, we'll actually indicate when you're in deep sleep, and we'll use the temperature to even slow those brain waves down a little bit more, spend more time in deep sleep so we can emphasize it and automatically adjust for it while you're asleep. So that state is coming out with the sleep tracker in the fall. In September is when that's going to come out. They're working through the algorithms, and
I was going to
AWS
ask.
is helping us with the machine learning. So they're
Okay.
validating it all now.
Well, then it's a tease. It's not quite out yet, but it sounds amazing. The real-time approach, kind of a smart sleep system that.
Yeah. So you can get your Dock Pro and then, play around with it, set your schedule, but then get ready for the automatic version. So again, when you're drinking alcohol and you haven't hit your deep sleep, we can help trigger that and get you there. If it indicates it all, we're going to try to emphasize it.
Amazing. Great information. Thank you for sharing. And we'll take Q&A now for Tara, and I'll actually pass the ball to Dr. John Lemansky now. And John, I'd love to, if you want to follow up and ask a couple questions of Tara and even Greg, while our additional questions come in from the audience. I'd love to hear from you on any questions or insights that you would have to add, Dr. Lemansky.
Yeah, no, those were great presentations. I think, there was one question that I did want to address. I would say that the combination of the presentations was great because it really focused on all the different parameters that go into getting quality sleep. And I would say that, sleep is an issue for everybody. I mean, some people obviously worse than others, shift workers. I saw a lot of comments about shift workers being in the military or, any kind of profession, having a child, any kind of sleep disturbance is an issue that I think both techniques can really help with. The question I wanted to address was the one about sleep aids. So there was one question about, using benzodiazepines or alcohol for sleep and why that might negatively impact sleep. So the best analogy that I've heard for that one is sleep aid is kind of like a 2x4. If you get hit in the head by a 2x4, you will pass out, but you're not going to get quality sleep. And that's kind of probably the best way to address that. So, those medications which are being prescribed, in significant quantities, really actually inhibit your ability to get into the deep sleep and the REM sleep cycle. So if you've taken them before, you wake up, you're groggy, you have brain fog. So yeah, you slept for like 15 hours, but you didn't actually get the quality sleep you need. And I think Dr. Kelly mentioned this about the lymphatic system. So we've known for a long time that certain cycles of sleep allow you to really kind of process the day's events and form your memories and your connections. But the impact of deep sleep, I think, has been recently really revealed that during that period is really when you're actually clearing the brain of all the toxins that build up throughout the day in this lymphatic system. And I think that's one of the more interesting aspects of sleep research, especially there was a few questions about like TBIs and PTSD. You build up a lot of the plaque formations that we see in later onset Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's, things like that. And the question is that also a factor because of lack of deep sleep? So I think I've used Qualia before. I haven't had the chance because I live in Puerto Rico and I'm lazy and I haven't ordered yet to get the products. But yeah, but I think there's a couple things that really impact that ability to get into deep and REM sleep. I think the temperature is probably one of the least appreciated ones. I usually will do an ice bath. I'll do sauna ice bath before going to bed, and then I'll hit like 3 hours on deep and REM. So on the demo that Dave did, I don't know if you noticed, but the highest score achieved was 99. So that was by me.
You got a 99 on readiness or sleep?
No, on sleep.
Sleep score.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's from basically, I mean, a lot of things, but mostly the sauna ice bath, a couple 30, 40 minutes before bed. So I think temperature is huge. I think really impacting the sleep-wake cycle, really impacting melatonin production, blocking the adenosine breakdown is extremely important. So all those things go into creating a good sleep pattern. And then it becomes a cycle. So if you have had a couple nights of bad sleep, the next day your whole circadian rhythm is taken offline. You're hungrier, your cortisol is higher, your melatonin is suppressed, and so it just creates this cycle that becomes an issue. So I thought those are amazing presentations. I don't know if there's any new questions.
There's going to be a few more we'll get to. I did just launch a quick poll. We'd love to check in from you all that are still on with us here towards the end. Might go a little 5 minutes over or so. So we'll finish shortly, but a couple questions we'd love to learn a little bit more about your business, the work you're doing in terms of supporting clients with sleep and how we can best support at HeadsUp. So feel free to take a few minutes a few seconds to fill out that poll. And then, yeah, there are definitely a few more questions here that we can get to. Looks like Joel had one. Tara, I may have missed it, but is there a fan that blows the air onto the person laying in bed, or does it change the ambient air, but doesn't blow onto the person? If you can describe exactly how it
so it's basically a layer that it's powered by water. Water is just has more effectiveness when it comes to thermal exchange than air does. If you think about, you're not going to put your hand in boiling water, yet if your oven's open and your hand goes in there, as long as it doesn't touch anything, it's basically going to be fine. So we use water. My co-founder and husband, his uncle invented the water bed. So it has a long legacy there, but it's basically like a mattress pad. So if you were to put on a mattress pad layer or a mattress protector, it's going to be thin like that, and it goes underneath your sheet. What's hooked up to that is then a tube that circulates that water. You set the water temperature. So our base model is with a remote control, and it's kind of like the old-fashioned thermostat. Set it and forget it. It's one temperature all the way up to the Dock Pro that is got a little bit more efficacy. So when you're buying it, also think about it in terms of like a room air conditioner, like you were talking about. You're going to buy a small room air conditioner for a smaller heat load. If it's a higher heat load, or you're someone that sweats a lot at night, you're going through menopause. We've got a great menopause study coming out in the Journal of Menopausal Women, I think, or Journal of Menopause, I think, in June, on just the effects of being able to, sleep better, will reduce your symptoms overall, but being able to manage your temperature is really important for women in general, even throughout our cycle, you'll have different hormonal levels, which will trigger different temperatures. So it really works to one temperature. So whether you're having a hot flash, you have a hot moment, you're just hot and sweaty at night, you may not climb into bed hot and sweaty, it manages that. So it's active cooling. Again, just like the radiator in your car is actively cooling your engine, you wouldn't trust a Ferrari to just have air blow over it and hope that it turns out okay. You as a Ferrari engine need to have your temperature managed, and that really does help mitigate symptoms throughout the night.
I got to say the analogies and metaphors on today's webinar are strong. There's been Ferraris, there's been 2x4s. John, you had a great one. Awesome. Thanks for clarifying, Tara. That I'm sure that's helpful for Joel. Joel also had a question about for you, Dr. Kelly, in terms of how you came up with the dosages, and he thought he had heard there was some deeper research behind the synergistic effect of the ingredients. If you can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, so I mean, that could be an hour conversation, but I'll just touch on the highlights. But so if you just take something like building melatonin, right, you need tryptophan as the core building block. And then B6 is involved as a cofactor, magnesium is a cofactor. An herb like schizandra, there's a few others in Qualia Night, actually have been studied and support that melatonin signaling system, right? So that would be your melatonin stack, for lack of a better way to say it. And then, you know, there'd be an adenosine stack and a GABA stack and a stack to counteract hyperarousal. So what we did in the simplest sense is we created those individual stacks, and then some of them had other additional ingredients at the beginning, and then we mixed and matched, tracked how people sleep, subtracted the ingredient here, added one here, and then really it was that recipe building over time. So it's a
makes sense.
Almost the opposite of what you would normally see in a supplement, where it's like, oh, we'll just
Right.
throw all these things, slap a label, and send it out into the wild. So,
Lots of stages of experimenting. Yeah.
And it's
Yeah,
because
that
sleep's
makes sense.
hard, right? It's
Right.
I think if our audience gets nothing else out of this, it's that a lot of things have to come together at the right time, including temperature and
Right.
these other things for sleep to really be restorative.
Right. And one other thing that hasn't been discussed too much, but is the role of plays with circadian rhythm is the amount of sunlight you get during the day, right? And, sunlight first thing in the morning, and sunlight through the middle of the day for vitamin D production. And I was actually tracking. I created a custom tile on our dashboard, and I tracked total time in sunlight to see how well I could stay on track with that. But well, we're almost done with today's webinar. We just got a couple more slides and a few final points here. And if you stay till the last slide, the one right after this, we're gonna have a special surprise and a giveaway we're doing. But now I'm going to bring in Chuck, the head of our integrations, to talk a little bit about options for top devices to consider for effective sleep tracking, which happen to integrate nicely with our system to bring in the data. And he'll cover these a little bit briefly here, and then I'll talk a little bit about how we might be able to support you on designing the right remote monitoring solution with the right devices and in your programs and your business model. So Chuck, if you want to speak a little bit to the options here for a lot of the integration partners that we serve.
Thanks, TJ. I think most people are aware of most of the companies listed here. And I just want to real quick before I go into those, what Tara mentioned is important. The most important consideration of sleep is getting 7 to 9 hours per night. Looking at sleep stages on all the consumer wearables is almost meaningless. You can trend them. That's probably the only thing you can do because they're not accurate. And the other thing is sleep staging, how it's broken down, even in sleep studies, is somewhat flawed, but I won't go down that rabbit hole. But anyway, what it comes down to on almost all the devices listed here, they all do a pretty good job of keeping track of how many hours you sleep. So, the start and end time and all the wake times during the night. Some of them are better than others. And so then it really comes down to other considerations when you pick a device to track your sleep. One of the big ones for people is they don't want to sleep with a watch of any sort on, nothing on the wrist. So that's where the Oura Ring had made that very popular because you put it on, you forget you're wearing it, doesn't get in the way when you're sleeping. So that's a great choice. Some of the wrist-based devices aren't that bad if they're not too big. Like Garmin has some ginormous sports watches that people probably don't, that do sleep with them, some athletes, which I can't see how they could do that. Or they wear the Apple Watch loose. A lot of women do that, and the green light just floods the bedroom at night as they turn over, which is not good. The other thing going down the road, I think there will be a trend towards lower resistance. And what I mean by that is people don't want to wear anything. So having a bed tracker, like what Chili's coming out with, or Sleep Me, I should say, is a good thing. 8 Sleep's another company that does that. And I think beyond that, there'll be other things that even without a bed, that might be, watching you with infrared light of sorts to take measurements off your body without any sensor touching you. And some of that stuff's being worked on. One of the things about bed systems I should point out is, and you could probably hear in the background some cats, if you have pets that you can't keep off your bed, they will trigger movement, especially, and sometimes heart rate that isn't yours. So it shows up. And I used like the early rendition of the 8 Sleep system, was called Luna Sleep, and we'd be gone at a marathon and we'd have recovery scores, both my wife and myself, from our cats. So there you have it. Then the other thing is, and TJ and I were talking about this earlier, there's been a lot of interesting small studies looking at the association between metrics you track from wearables and glucose. And so heart rate variability is one of those metrics that does show, for a lot of people, a close correlation between the HRV level and a morning reading of glucose. So if you wear a CGM, that makes it even better because you can actually see how these things trend even overnight, the two signals, which is pretty interesting. So if you want to do a little biohacking, N=1 kind of thing.
There you go. Yes, the role of nutrition and glucose. Of course, it's all interconnected, but that can play a big role. I remember from when I did the Freestyle Libre, the CGM, which we have listed here as one of our 2 CGM integrations, the correlation between HRV and glucose, like the more stable the glucose was, like the higher the HRV, and vice versa. So amazing. Thanks for sharing, Chuck. Always great to have your knowledge around the device tracking front. Yeah, I use the Oura Ring. A lot of us on our team use the Oura Ring, but as we've often, there's lots of options out there, and not all of them are perfect, right? As Tara mentioned, the sleep stages may only be 40 to 60% accurate, and so take the data with a grain of salt, as Dave was mentioning earlier as well, and not taking it too seriously. So the last thing I'll mention, so regarding like designing programs for your offers and involving solutions like a Doc Pro Sleep Me system, a Qualia Night, wearables, using our system to help validate and track that progress is our goal to help practices in their business model, right? So I actually have a presentation that I often lead on one-on-one calls. So if you all are interested in checking that out, I'll put a link again to where you can create a free account with us, and then you'll actually be prompted to schedule a free strategy call. And on that call, we can go over the optimal business model design, like what works, our best practices that we're seeing other health professional practices use. And for those of you who have stayed on till the end here, I think we got about 45, give or take. These are the last few items to celebrate with you all. You guys can enter to win $2,000 worth of sleep technology. So number 1, 3 months worth of HeadsUp Pro, 1 month of Qualia Night for you and one client, and 1 Doc Pro Sleep System by Sleep Me. So this combo, it's at least over 2, might even be more than that. And to enter, all you need to do is create that free account with us, which you'll be prompted to schedule that strategy call, and then follow all 3 of our companies on your favorite social media. Instagram, LinkedIn are the 2 that we note here for HeadsUp, Sleep Me, and NeuroHacker. So we're going to have 1 lucky winner, and that, without further ado, brings us to the end of today's webinar, our presentation. So if there's any last notes or questions, we will take them. Any parting words, Tara, Greg, and John?
No, just that, we do work with, a full range of people that really do struggle to get sleep. So minus like sleep apnea, but severe insomnia, depression, PTSD with the military. If you have questions about, how to come up with some ideas to solve that for any of your clients, I do encourage you to reach out to me either through that social media and tag me. I'm Tara at sleep.me, so not very difficult. But if you have questions on how to do that, would love to connect on how to solve that more.
Amazing. Thanks, Tara. I put her email in the chat box. Greg, you're muted.
For me, one of the things that's like truism is feedback's the breakfast of champions. So I just commend the HeadsUp team for everything you're doing to make that feedback loop better and stronger for all the people using your system.
Well, thank you, Dr. Kelly. Appreciate that. Yeah, it means a lot. We'll keep doing our great work here, and we're honored to be partnered with great companies like yourselves.
Yeah, the only thing I would say is I think sleep, as I mentioned earlier, is probably one of the most important aspects of being healthy. I think it really impacts everything else that you're trying to do for people who are still on the call in terms of, health coaches, naturopathics, MDs. If you're trying to get your patients healthy, I think nutrition is extremely important, but I think sleep is probably the thing that can help your clients really kind of take that next step. So everything that was discussed here today, I think is extremely important. And yeah, thank you to our panelists for joining us.
Amazing. Thank you, John. Always a pleasure to have you be a part of these. And thank you again to Tara and Dr. Kelly for joining us today. And it's been a pleasure to partner with you too. And we're excited to hear all the great feedback and benefits that our audience receives from this presentation and leaning in to learn more about your company. So we'll have the follow-up recording for everyone, and we'll have the slides, and we'll have information to take advantage of the great opportunities to test out our company's, our partners' products here today.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, everyone. See you, Tara. See you, Dr. Greg, John.
Thanks, TJ.